Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here. I am John Sneisen, and the Canadian economy doesn't seem to be going in a good direction. I think we can clearly say that, considering the amount of debt, sewage that we see circulating around the economy. We hear a lot of media outlets claiming that it's sunny days for the Canadian economy, or as Justin Trudeau would call it, sunny ways or whatever weird like that, because it's a current year. But there's no doubt there are a lot of problems, and they're based on centralization, bank insolvency, cash deposit ratios being incredibly low, the housing markets, the manipulation, the spoofing. It all comes down to a very unnatural practice of centralization that we've seen going back 1,000 years. 1024 AD, the first fiat currency. It's been 1,000 years, and all of them fail. And you see these central bankers continuously either believe that it'll work this time, because maybe we'll manipulate it this way, or we'll see evil people that know it's going to crash utilize that in order to indebt the populace and push them into debt servitude as much as possible. And then in comes a cashless society that goes through the banks, and you never own your money. But there's a lot to be said about this, and I wanted to mention something that I found. It's a headline that kind of stood out to me, because Poloz of the Bank of Canada, he said in this Bloomberg article, says it in their headline, Poloz sees higher rates as a natural tendency for Canada's economy. And this seems very unnatural. Sure, naturally, when you centralize things, certain things happen, but this isn't natural at all. It's all manipulated by the hand of man, and it all goes in the same direction every single time, and it's incredibly destructive, and it will end in a very, very impoverished populace for those that don't prepare themselves, they don't educate themselves, they don't get ready for the obvious, for the inevitable, for something that happens every single time. We cannot put a date on it, but we know it will happen, like it has every single other time. Anyway, let's go into this article out of Bloomberg as it goes into saying here, Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz said he still believes interest rates are poised to continue rising once headwinds to growth dissipate. Speaking in an interview with Amanda Lang on BNN Bloomberg, Poloz said there's still a lot of evidence of underlying strength in the economy, and the current slowdown is likely just a detour. Headwinds, particularly high household debt and trade uncertainty that is crimping business investment, are forcing the central bank to keep borrowing costs below where they would likely be otherwise. And I quote, "The natural tendency is for interest rates to still go up a bit," Poloz said in the interview, which aired Friday. "I don't really know how much a bit is and what the timing might be." That's a crazy statement. "It depends on our forecast coming true, that the slowdown is temporary, and getting through all that and getting back on the track we were, say, a year ago, and that's going to take some doing." That's exactly what it doesn't take. More centralization and control, and the same things that led to it in the first place, Poloz. But nonetheless, going forward, it says the comments underscore the governor's confidence that the nation's expansion remains on solid footing and the economy will emerge from a recent soft patch. It's a view that puts him at odds with investors betting growth will slow further, and that the central bank's next move will likely be a rate cut. Markets are placing odds of a cut over the next year at about 50%. The Bank of Canada has raised borrowing costs 5 times since 2017, but recently indicated it won't move any higher for now amid a slowdown that brought growth to a near halt at the end of last year. Asked whether his recent dovish tilt was premature, Poloz said it was triggered by an abrupt and synchronous global slowdown stoked by trade uncertainty that has kept companies from investing. That required a cautious approach to policy, he said. These are sentiment-driven soft things, Poloz said. You can't model that mechanically and expect to predict how much a trade war and rhetoric is going to affect those things. Yet if those trade concerns get resolved, the rebound could be swift. And I need to mention here that this rise in interest rates, sure, we have seen worse in the past, but the fact that it's unsustainable at the current rate says a lot about where we're heading, and not to mention the desperation by these central banks to push interest rates higher because they know they will go negative, and even no matter what they do today, unless they go full suicide on us here, we will go negative. And we saw the recent news that it was major recession indicator about a month and a half ago regarding the inverted yield curve data, where the 10-year and the 1 month in Canada inverted, which is worse than the 10-year and the 3-month in the United States, to say the least. I wanted to continue on here, though. It says positive scenario. Sentiment can turn around very quickly if there's a resolution, Poloz said. If sentiment goes up, investment will recover, and we're back into the positive scenario, where I think the global economy can grow for a long time. What do you designate a long time, Poloz? Because you said you don't know how much further it'll go up. You don't know what a bit is. A bit could be anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30%, not likely, but come on. I mean, you don't know what's happening. You're not in control. And we don't want you to be in control nonetheless, because the problem is the control issue of central banks controlling, manipulating, and pushing the populace into debt. But the fact is, he doesn't even know how to be in control because he doesn't know what's happening. He's either stupid or evil, and I think in this case he's stupid. I think it could be both, but I think it's just the fact that these people have way too much on their plate. They've manipulated way too much into oblivion. They've seen the history books. It's all adding up, and they just don't know what to do. And this idea that it'll work for a long time, everything's going to be fine for a long time. Does a long time mean a year? Does a long time mean 10 years? There's no saying. There's no putting a date on the crash anyway, but we just know it inevitably will happen. And they are even kind of admitting to that factor as well, that, oh, well, it'll eventually happen, but it won't happen for a long time. Everything's just fine and dandy. Just like Poloz mentioning recently that employment data shows that we're in a good place in the economy. You mean the completely fraudulently manipulated employment numbers where you hide most of the number in the labor force participation rate, where people stop being considered unemployed after a small amount of time and not looking for a job? It's ridiculous. John, this just doesn't end, does it? What do you think?
Well, actually, we will end because central banks always end. They never
Yes.
last forever, right? So that's the historical fact. But the other thing here is they're talking about the 2% inflation rate. They're talking about GDP. Actually, their quarterly GDP growth was in 2018. The last numbers was 0.1%. That is, I guess that's great growth. They need 2% growth in order to prop up the interest rate payments, or else they're gonna go into a tailspin, which they currently are heading straight towards. Now, I had some questions. I did a recent presentation at a crypto group here in Winnipeg about the cashless future. And I entailed it, and I tailored it around the Canadian economy. What I found was some very interesting pointers there, because the official inflation at the time when I did the research was supposed to be, 1.75, 2% as it says now officially. But what you're seeing currently, if you take a look at the actual monetary supplies and how much they printed money, just the M0. So this is just the M0. This is... we've been talking about how nations like Norway and Sweden actually removing cash. Well, Canada doesn't really. They're moving a bit of their coinage out of circulation, but not their notes, because they printed a mass amounts of them. As a matter of fact, they printed over the last 10 years, they printed about 39.85%. So just the cash and coins in circulation has increased by an average of 3.98%. On an average, so just that versus the 1.75 or 2% is kind of not correct. And then you look at the M3 and how much that have increased. Well, that one has increased as much as 90%, Josh, over the last 10 years. That's 9% increase in total Canadian dollars in existence, electronic, and
And John, people have to understand what this all means, and that is that they print vast amounts of currency out of thin air at the central bank. It doesn't have anything to do with the prime minister necessarily, though prime ministers do, cause some effect to the economy, and of course, certainly the markets, but a little bit to the economy. But overall, they print vast amounts of currency, they devalue the currency, and then they, with the interest on the debt, vast amounts of taxpayer money is going to paying off that interest on the debt. And if you're only paying the interest on the debt, what does that tell people
That means
about
insolvency,
the true
Josh.
intentions?
That means
the true
insolvency.
intention. If you only paid off the interest on your debt, is that a sign that you want to pay off that debt, or are you? I mean, imagine just having people to extort to pay off your interest on the debt and just never actually focus on the actual debt itself. It is vastly destructive, and it's destroying wealth. And with all these people saying we need to push minimum wages higher, no, it's not the minimum wage. It's a currency. It's a problem of the currency inflation rate going up and up and up, and people not being able to purchase more with their money. So no matter what, the value of that money, despite the amount of zeros behind it, goes down all the time.
Yeah, Josh, what we got to understand is the actual, you were talking about the minimum wages. Well, the whole prospect of minimum wages was as far back as the French Revolution. They tried to raise minimum wage, and it didn't work at that time either. So why would it work now, guys? It's just stupidity. But what they believe is that if they raise it, now everybody's going to get paid more. What they don't understand is that everybody will also have to pay more for everything else. And so you're not going to be better off. And then on top of that, as we saw, they're printing way much more money. So I had the question, Josh, what the official inflation numbers versus like all this monetary printing, like it doesn't make sense to me. Well, so I took a look at some numbers, and especially here in Canada with the massive real estate bubble that they created by having the interest rates so low, I took a look at the RBC housing report to see what they are reporting for numbers when it comes to how much it costs total for to actually have a house, and that includes the taxes, the payment of your interest and your principal, plus your utilities on the house, and a couple other costs. But if you take a look at the actual numbers that they calculate the inflation with, they calculate it as a cost-weighted average of 26.8% of your income. Well, what is the actual official numbers? I took all the provinces and divided them in 12, but that kind of is not true because it distorts it, because most of the provinces have some provinces have most of the population. But even doing that, I came up with a number that was 45.2%, Josh. That was the net cost for actually having a house for the Canadian population, not 26.8 that the government is telling us. I took a look at Ontario and BC and run their numbers. Well, that was 75.5%, and they're 50% of the population. So something is clearly wrong here when they calculate the CPI, when you have the average cost for the Ontarians and BC people are 75.5% of their income is housing costs. Meanwhile, the CPI calculates only 26.8, Josh. So something is, it's really distorted. And of course, when you saw the M3 money supply, going up about 90%, that just tells us that there's so much more money printing that is created. And of course, the numbers that they use is heavily distorted and manipulated to make it look a lot better. It takes a tiny little bit of time to look at the value of the Canadian dollar versus other currencies and versus gold and silver. It's almost at new record highs again, what they had in 2008. You're just seeing the Canadian dollars just falling very heavily. And if you go to the grocery store or anywhere else, try to buy things in stores, if I guess these academics doesn't buy stuff, they just get stuff for free from the government, from the taxpayers, I would assume. They don't have any clue about what real inflation is in the economy, Josh.
Well, John, how sustainable can this debt bubble possibly be in Canada going forward? It's amazing that it's lasted as long as it has.
Well, it's not sustainable at all. And the thing is, I wrote in my book, The Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, ? Back in 2015, I started writing it. And this was actually before Trudeau got into power. I wrote the book during when the transition came from from Harper to Trudeau. So you actually saw, I didn't write it on the case that Trudeau is a moron, me being a right wing, hating the left wing. I actually wrote it as a view on the economy, that we're just printing massive amounts of money. We were getting in heavy amounts of debt, and Canada's economy is extremely reliant upon real estate growth. As in my book I talked about, it's about 20%, Josh, of the economy is real estate related growth in the GDP. So that is just the slopes that you see now in Vancouver and Toronto, that are severely dropping in prices a lot of places. They are getting hit by this massive bubble. And let's just take a look at one last chart here that I made up for my presentation. And if we, for example, if we were to move next time down 4.25%, well, we would end up I said 4%, but we would end up at negative 2.5%. How are they going to be able to do that? Countries like Switzerland have tried to do it and failed because people are just taking out cash and hoarding it. Well, they can go cashless, Josh, and
which they did in Sweden, and which they did in many other countries, and they're trying in Japan where they went negative. Yeah. It's just extensive.
Yeah, and if you take a look at what WAM reported on, what I reported on just a little while ago, it's called Project Jasper. It's the first ever blockchain central bank and bank run blockchain. It was actually running on the R3 consortium blockchain, the Corda 2.0 blockchain. And if you take a look at the transaction that they made with Project Juniper, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, well, it was run by the Quorum platform that JP Morgan has created. So, they're going around and talking Bitcoin is a scam, all this garbage about decentralized currencies.
JP Morgan literally in the last few days was saying Bitcoin is above its intrinsic value. When did JP Morgan ever care about a quote unquote intrinsic value, even though I think it's completely subjective, and I don't think it has anything really to do with intrinsic value, because it's not magical. But I mean, subjectively, it's so crazy. JP Morgan of all people, and then they're pushing their own blockchain quote unquote solutions. They're trying to corner the market, and they're gonna fail. They're going to fail dramatically, as we're seeing the IMF push for this too. We're seeing so many banks try this, and they're all buying up Bitcoin after they plunge it. It's all market manipulation, but they're also pushing their own versions of these blockchain, infrastructures, but they are completely centralized, and they go through the banks. And that's what I wanted to get to, John, was we see this in India, we see this in China, we see this in Sweden, we see this in Australia, this massive push. We recently talked about Darwin, the town of or city of Darwin in Australia, really pushing, attempting to go into the Chinese-style cashless system, facial recognition, hopefully social credit in their opinion.
Smart cities, right? And
smart cities.
Yeah, but with what ran under the radar here was just barely reported on, that this blockchain transaction happened. There was over 80 different banks and intermediaries involved in these transactions. So you tell me that they don't really have a system available? What are we seeing here? They actually put out their system. They made a transaction between two separate nations' blockchains, and they made it work. They clearly have created something here that they're ready for a crisis with. That's my thought, Josh. And this is going to be very dangerous. It's so funny how in their white paper they called it distributed ledger technology. I wouldn't call it distributed ledger technology. This is centralized ledger technology by these banksters, by these communist entities that the central banks are. These guys, but they're ready. They're ready for a crisis to hit. Now, it seems like they're getting really, really close. So they're ready to pull the plug at any time, Josh, with their new cashless system that's coming. And of course, the number one thing that they're going to come after is, of course, they want to take people that are not paying taxes. They just want to rape people more financially because they don't have money. They're all bankrupt.
And they do want to control the narrative as well, which is where social credit and things like that come in. But I do have to mention, I mean, you can look at the blockchain from two directions. It's like anything. It could be used for good. It can be used for bad, depending on how it's utilized. It's like, for example, food. Food can be used for sustenance and for health, but it could also be used to kill someone if it's poisoned. The same goes for blockchain. It can be used if centralized to enslave humanity, and it can be used if decentralized to overthrow that which enslaves humanity. It depends on the fundamental product at hand. Is it revolutionary, evolutionary? Can it be used for good, or is it used for evil? And it depends on the individualistic aspect of it. You cannot judge all by the same cover or by the same fruition. Look, we are looking at something like the centrally planned cashless society going through government and banks as a huge problem because it's centralized. If your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's a bank's. And if all your money is always going through the banks via digital transactions and legal tender laws and all that kind of stuff, by fiat, by law, by force,
it's game over.
Then that's game over. Absolutely, that's a huge problem. But then if you are completely off the grid, so to say, I mean decentralized, fundamentally useful cryptocurrencies and blockchain infrastructure technology, you can replace that same system, and that's what they're scared of. They want to use that which we're trying to free ourselves with in order to enslave us, and we cannot fall for it, and I don't think we will, because the government and the banks are wholly inefficient. If you've ever tried to use a bank in any way, and everyone that's watching this has, and had to deal with a bank, you know they're old school, they're old guard, they're inefficient, they're terrible, they're inconvenient, they make everything difficult on people for absolutely no reason. They're closed half the time, and like the stock markets, you know, closed on weekends, it's a close. You can't invest anymore. With something like cryptocurrency, it's never closed, and you always have the ability to utilize it and trade it and whatever. And you know, there's no chargebacks unless you want a cryptocurrency that has the ability to do chargebacks. That's your choice. That's the market's choice. That's the individual's choice. But nonetheless, there's a massive difference that we have to take into account, which is what we're seeing in China. And what we are seeing develop at a scary scale, at a technocratic super state level in China, as has been planned out for many years through the Trilateral Commission and others, to establish China as this massive superpower that's technocratic. And of course, the United Nations is pretty happy about that. And they've talked in the recent past about moving their headquarters to Beijing. So look, this is all coming to fruition at the same time, and we need to look at the revolutionary and evolutionary tools in order to avoid it and to solve this problem, because with Project Jasper and these other initiatives, we need to understand that they are doing everything they can to try and catch up to this evolutionary idea of breaking free from this system, and they want to utilize people who are already dependent, uneducated, and weak in order to make them more dependent, more uneducated, and more weak, and have basically the populace under the boot of the state and banking system entirely with no escape. We have to escape while there is still time. We are seeing the push for 5G. We are seeing the push for social credit, facial recognition. Facebook's been involved in all that as well in China, and now in many other places like Australia, where they use criminality and convenience in order to install tyranny, and we must break free from that. John, there are many solutions as we've gone into food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Gold and silver as wealth insurance. Fundamental value in that in history. You look back and it's pretty obvious. Not investment advice, just a way to actually ensure your purchasing power against the financial crises that happen every single time, because all fiat currencies eventually revert to their true value of zero. Always have, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, and of course the cryptocurrencies, as we mentioned. But John, what do you think, wrapping it up, for Canadians to look at, as everyone says, oh, it's Trudeau's fault, oh, it's the Conservatives, it's the NDP, it's all this slow incremental frog boil into complete collectivist control of the populace, and people are busy fighting each other instead of fighting the real enemies that create problem, reaction, solution, repeat for eternity, regardless of the figurehead. What do you think, as we wrap it up, for Canadians, what should they look to do to avoid this inevitable crisis?
Well, governance is a problem, Josh. People got to actually start understanding it. You're just running forth and back between the left and the right, trying to seek solutions. Meanwhile, you're not getting solutions. It's just getting worse and worse, and things are getting worse. I find it funny, and I want to end with this actually, because Poloz, somebody sent me an email telling me that I should get on my cryptocurrency conference here in Winnipeg, Stephen Poloz to speak, because he sent me a video where Stephen Poloz says Bitcoin is a fantastic invention of our lifetime. And he was praising it, but of course he didn't really talk about his project Jasper that central bank has been creating and using, of course. But that's what he's saying. He's trying to come out and saying, oh yeah, it's so great. Meanwhile, they're creating their centralized control grid that the Bitcoin was created to be the complete opposite of. So it's really funny. You've seen this this fight between decentralization and centralization now. And one of them is going to break out and win. And we got to make sure that it's not going to be the centralized one. Because do you want to be in a state where media gets regulated? Like here in Canada, they got like 600 something million just recently from the government. And Trudeau was just recently talking about, yeah, we're just going to create a list of approved news sources on the internet for you to look at. That, yeah, of course, you could trust us that we have made all of our due diligence on how great these news sources
Hitler,
are.
Stalin.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's just insane what is going on with the government, but that's a natural outcome, Josh, of the government. At the end of the fiat printing era, you just printed yourself into oblivion. You're bankrupt. You only can go hardcore tyrannical, or you just dissolve into nothing and then have people become free and create their own type of governance structures. Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's how we're gonna win. We're gonna fight them back. We're gonna make sure that everybody gets educated upon what's the difference between centralized and decentralized blockchains, because that is the future. That is what you can actually replace all these crazy governance structures with, and have almost next to no government whatsoever, if any. And that's, of course, me and Josh, we don't want any, but if you want some, you could have a tiny little bit that are just
Private
run by tiny little laws that are set. Don't kill anyone, don't murder anyone, and a couple of things that just being decent.
Well, it's based on a voluntary society on a private contract, which people can vote on as individuals, and it's property rights at its best. But I wanted to finish this off, John. We need to be decentralized, rule ourselves, be free, be responsible. That is a basis of freedom itself. And I wanted to do a rallying call for all of you watching out there, as we are in a crucial time in our history. First of all, being demonetized and censored and incredibly shadow banned to a ridiculous extent on YouTube. This is actually our worst month this May in about 2 years on YouTube. We are getting less views than we did when we had about 5% of the viewers, of the subscribers. It's absolutely horrible. But I also want to say we have a Subscribe Star page, which people can subscribe to, where they can pay $4.99 or more a month to get premium content that is not safe for YouTube, that is subscriber-only content. And under $4.99 a month, you can pledge to us. It's a Patreon alternative, Subscribe Star. You could do that. But $4.99 a month and more, that means we will give you premium content and be able to respond to your messages directly and talk with you, because we get hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of messages a week, and it just gets over the top impossible to follow. But also, as far as a rallying call goes, we got events like crazy this year, and amazing events. And I want to first start with the Red Pill Expo, which is June 7th to 9th in Hartford, Connecticut, hosted by the one and only G. Edward Griffin, with speeches as well by Robert Kiyosaki and people like Jeff Berwick, Cynthia McKinney, Del Bigtree, so many people, Zach Bush. There's so many incredible people. I'm going to be there, and many others and media will be there. It's going to be a great event. I can't wait, and you should buy the tickets below. We have the link. It's 2 weeks away, guys, and we do not want to miss this event. It's an amazing event. We think more people should get involved, because you can learn about ways to avoid this inevitable crisis at this event in an incredible way from some of the world-renowned experts, including J. Edward Griffin, who wrote the book, literally, on the Federal Reserve, which, of course, was A Creature from Jekyll Island, which is one of the greatest best-selling macroeconomic books in history. And, I mean, it's an amazing book, and we are looking forward to catching up with him again. I think I'm doing an interview with him in the next few days as well. But please come out to that, and also check out Anarcha Vegas in July, July 21st in Las Vegas. Anarcha Vegas, many incredible speakers, including Bo of the Fifth Column and Larkin Rose and J. Edward Griffin and many others. And let's also and you, by the way, use promo code WHAM for that. We got a link below for that as well. But on top of that, we got the Winnipeg Crypto Conference in October that John is putting on, which he's put a lot of work into. And the Winnipeg Crypto Conference will be a great way for people to learn in Canada about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, as he went into previously there. There are so many things coming up in the near future, and I personally cannot wait. It's just exploding with events, because People are more passionate than ever. Things are coming to a fruition at this point where you cannot ignore it anymore, and people want to protect themselves and protect their families as they should. So we have these options, we have these solutions, and I think a great way is networking with these people, these world-renowned experts and amazing people, and come to a conclusion of what we should do in our own lives to improve our own lives, make our lives better, make ourselves more powerful, more responsible, more sustainable going forward, and more importantly than ever, if you have a family, make sure that your family is safe in the inevitable downturn that we all face. So anyway, we got so many events. Check those links below and check our Subscribestar page out as well as everything else. Our outro to this video will explain some of the ways that you can help support independent media here at WAM. But anyway, John, I've been talking for a while. Thanks for going into this with us. We will be back with much more. I've been away in Europe and Africa and all over the place, 8 countries in the last month, and it's just been absolutely crazy. And I'm out of money, guys, as well, because honestly, I didn't spend much on this trip because I'm doing a documentary and I found the cheapest routes, but we are basically dead broke at WAM as far as that goes, because we are trying to bring people a message and YouTube's shutting us down, and we have to depend on alternate ways to ensure our own wealth, which is something we teach all the time. So we will always be sustainable to some extent, and we will always be able to bring you these videos, but I would prefer to be able to bring them to you all the time without issue with the stress of having to deal with all this. So again, Subscribestar below. It helps us amazingly. We need to support independent media, if not us, someone else, in order to win this information war, which we are all at the helm of, as a narrative gets completely controlled by the state banking system and these elites that are trying to manipulate our minds and drive us into dependency, weakness, and stupidity. We must prevail against them. So anyway, thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Bye.